In our previous video titled Silent Rise of ASEAN, we explored the hidden gem that is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This international juggernaut has been working behind the scenes, which has accelerated the economic and social growth within Southeast Asian countries. However, all the successes of ASEAN countries come with a hefty and dark price. Contrary to its rise, there exist sacrifices and even an evil that goes undetected in these 11-member countries. In today's video, we'll explore the dark side of ASEAN's rapid growth, because money and power have a price to pay. So, stay tuned until the end of the video. This is the dark side of ASEAN's rapid growth. While the rise of the ASEAN is somewhat unprecedented, the cases of corruption in the region is something that is not entirely secret. Large cases of corruption, such as theft and money laundering, do not escape the ears of the international scene. It is true that there are substantial differences when it comes to the overall economic performance and stability of these countries. However, there are still shared challenges that exist within these nations. In the majority of the countries in the ASEAN region, specifically Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, there exists low levels of accountability and transparency from the government. That's because these countries are either a monarchy, parliament, or socialist compared to the United States, which promotes democracy and transparency. There are inadequate checks and balances when it comes to power, which perpetuates the cycle of corruption among the ASEAN countries. In fact, in 2019, only 3 out of the 10 ASEAN countries scored more than 50 out of 100 on the Corruption Perceptions Index. In 2022, only Singapore went over the 50% mark. Aside from corruption issues and lack of transparency from governments, another looming threat to these nations is the underlying control of the US, alongside some conflicts with China. One of the biggest challenges of the countries in the regions is that they are usually stuck in the middle of the conflicts of global superpowers. The US Embassy brags about its strategic relations with ASEAN nations. While it looks good on paper, there are many underlying implications, ranging from indirect control, abuse of influence, and mishandling of funds. Having the US on your back, of course, is a good thing at times, but we cannot certainly say that the benefits outweigh the harms. While ASEAN's relationship with the US is somewhat of a love-hate combination, the same thing cannot be said when it comes to its relationship with China. The world is no stranger when it comes to territorial conflicts in the Asian region. Years have passed, but talks about China's militarization and claims on the South China Sea still stand today. Neighboring nations, mostly from the ASEAN region, have experienced territorial disputes with this superpower, which added to their already long list of issues to be solved. Corruption, control, or lack thereof, in the ASEAN region have proved to impact not only the country's economic development, but also played a key role in their growth. The rapid rise of ASEAN is of course something to be celebrated, but what it came with are consequences: rising disparity and inequality within the country's borders. Along with its rise, this alarming increase in wealth disparity is also just the beginning. Studies suggest that as ASEAN countries continue to grow in wealth, so will the inequality between the rich and the poor. In Indonesia, for example, the top 4 richest men produce more wealth than the poorest 100 million people, and about 50% of the country's wealth is in the hands of the top 1%. This unfavorable future is inevitable unless the organization finds a way to regulate its rapid growth. One good example of how this harm-benefit occurs is the process of urbanization. While it provides benefits such as increased workforce and establishment of new infrastructures, what comes with it is the relocation of people to urban centers. This means that economic movement is concentrated in these centers while leaving rural areas underdeveloped. Urbanization focuses on the opportunities and commercial establishments in these centers. The results are increased costs of living, reliance on imported and processed foods, and shifts in cultural and traditional identities. Arguably, one of the biggest issues of ASEAN regions is their overall rights violations. May it be labor or human rights, there is no shortage of cases that shock the modern world. If there is one thing similar to all the 10 member states of the organization, it's that human rights issues exist in one form or another. These human rights abuses range from religious freedoms, extrajudicial killings, issues regarding gender identity, and many more. In the benefit of these states, there are at least some attempts to alleviate the situations. For example, when Indonesia banned child marriages in 2018. But the conditions are still far from good, not only because the progress is slow, but also because there are instances of regress in other nations. Cue the Duterte drug war in the Philippines and the consistent threat to human rights defenders in Myanmar. Speaking of threats and defenders, a large majority of ASEAN member states also face issues regarding freedom of speech. Nations from the region continue to fall behind on the Press Freedom Index, consistently ranking in the bottom half. Data shows that almost all member states rank at the bottom half, including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, which holds the title of being one of the highest numbers of journalists killed in any country in the world. The Freedom House also ranked Vietnam in Laos as not free in terms of freedom of the press. ASEAN is once again breaking records, but not in a good way. Lastly, while human rights continue to suffer in the 10 ASEAN states, so do labor rights as well. Southeast Asia is known to be a hub for cheap laborers. This is precisely because their home and neighboring countries lack laws and regulations that address the rights of these valuable workers. This pressing issue results in abuse, ranging from low pay, or companies or contractors paying below the minimum wage, abuse from employers, and many more. Abuse seems to be something that proliferates in ASEAN countries, and the saddest thing about it is that it has existed for a long time, which made some tolerant of the issue. While we mentioned urbanization earlier, we will now analyze it more in depth and examine how it affects not only the people, but also the environment. Let's first paint a picture of what urbanization looks like. Imagine a city with lots of construction going on. Establishments and big buildings in the works, and lots of men in hard hats climbing mountains of concrete. At first glance, it looks good. It paints a picture of development and more work opportunities. But behind that progressive picture lies the dark truth, that for those projects to exist, communities and families have to be displaced. Old trees have to be cut down, and lots of harmful chemicals have to be inhaled not only by the workers, but also the people merely passing by. This rapid relocation of a large number of people also results in problems with sanitation, pollution, income disparity, and infrastructure challenges. Unlike the US, where you have agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, governing eco-friendly laws and initiatives, this simply does not really exist in Southeast Asia. One of the ASEAN countries that's paying a dark and high price for rapid growth is Indonesia. According to World Report 2023, the Indonesian government frequently violated civil and political rights, especially of disadvantaged groups based on religion, ethnicity, social status, gender, and sexual orientation. Police and military abuse were also reported to be prevalent in the country as well. To its benefit, the Republic of Indonesia has shown democratic improvements since the fall of an authoritarian regime in 1998. However, it seems like it still has a long way to go in terms of justice and equality. When we examine the Philippine archipelago, it has seen multitudes of issues, ranging from corruption, extrajudicial killings, and environmental issues to name a few. One of the biggest issues the country is facing is the human rights abuses allegedly committed by its former president, Rodrigo Duterte. Duterte's war on drugs is currently being investigated by the ICC, or International Criminal Court, into possible crimes against humanity. During Duterte's regime, from 2016 to 2019, multiple cases of extrajudicial killing, mishandling of funds, and abuse of power, among others, were rampant. Human rights abuses were not the only thing that were harming the country's growth. The Philippines has also been reportedly suffering from environmental issues, stemming from unregulated mining, deforestation, illegal logging, and water pollution. Lastly, we have Myanmar. Myanmar is a country with a troubled history and has recently caused some turbulence due to recent updates on its leadership. Myanmar has long struggled with internal conflicts between military forces within its borders. This long history has been elevated when a coup took place back in February 1, 2021, where the Myanmar military carried out brutal crackdowns on people who opposed their rule. This coup has shattered the hopes for democratic progress by people who have long struggled with repressive regimes. 2 years after the coup, the country is now facing unimaginable regression on its grounds. The United Nations Human Rights Committee even said that every feasible measurement, and in every area of Myanmar, has human rights travesty that covers economic, social, and cultural, as much as civil and political. In our previous video, we talked about the silent rise of the ASEAN region thanks to its proximity, unity, regulations, and shared culture. Today, we have also seen the lack of progress and the dark side of ASEAN as we have never seen before. It is in their similarities and shared experiences that they were able to achieve success. However, each member country has a struggle and a dark side that needs to be acknowledged. By shedding light on these and realizing that most of these challenges are shared, maybe the 11 ASEAN countries can formulate a solution that could improve the situation to not just grow economically, but have equal and fair rights to their citizens as well.